Have you ever wondered why you sometimes say yes when you really wanted to say no? Today we're diving into the hidden psychology that makes you vulnerable to manipulation every single day. You can get your own copy of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, by Robert Cialdini through the link in the video description below. In this groundbreaking work, Dr. Robert Cialdini, a renowned professor of psychology and marketing, reveals the 6 universal principles of influence that can lead anyone to say yes, even when they intended to say no. Based on 3 decades of rigorous scientific research and extensive field studies, Cialdini uncovers the psychology behind why we become easy targets for those skilled in the art of persuasion. By understanding these principles, you can not only defend yourself against manipulative tactics, but also ethically apply these same methods to become more persuasive in your own life. Let's begin with some background on Dr. Cialdini and his motivation for writing this book. Dr. Robert Cialdini is a professor emeritus of psychology and marketing at Arizona State University, who has spent his career studying the science of influence. What makes his research particularly valuable is his unconventional approach. He went undercover, working in various sales positions, joining fundraising organizations, and training at telemarketing firms to observe compliance tactics firsthand. He wanted to see how persuasion professionals operated in the real world, not just in laboratory settings. Cialdini discovered that despite the thousands of different tactics that compliance practitioners employ, the vast majority fall into 6 basic categories, each governed by a fundamental psychological principle that directs human behavior. These 6 principles: reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity, form the foundation of nearly all successful persuasion attempts. Understanding them gives us remarkable insight into why we do the things we do. The first principle Cialdini identifies is reciprocity. This principle is based on the deeply ingrained feeling that we should repay what another person has provided us. When someone does something for us, we feel obligated to return the favor. This rule is so powerful that it works even when we didn't ask for the initial favor, and even when we don't particularly like the person who provided it. The reciprocity principle has been demonstrated across all human societies and cultures, suggesting it's a fundamental aspect of human social behavior. Cialdini provides numerous examples of reciprocity in action. Free samples at grocery stores aren't just opportunities for customers to try products. They create a feeling of indebtedness that makes shoppers more likely to purchase. The Hare Krishna Society dramatically increased their donations when they began giving flowers to potential donors before asking for contributions. Even something as simple as a server bringing a mint with your restaurant bill can increase tips by around 3%, while 2 mints can boost tips by 14%. Another fascinating aspect of reciprocity is the rule of reciprocal concessions. If someone makes a concession to us, we feel compelled to make a concession in return. This is the psychological mechanism behind the effectiveness of the rejection then retreat technique, where someone makes a large request. They expect to be rejected, followed by a smaller request, the one they actually wanted you to agree to all along. Since they've backed down from their initial position, you feel social pressure to do the same by agreeing to the smaller request. The most effective way to defend against unwanted reciprocity is not to reject gifts or favors outright, but to redefine them. If you perceive the initial offering as a sales tactic rather than a genuine gift, you can avoid feeling obligated. However, it's important to note that reciprocity itself isn't inherently manipulative. It's a valuable social mechanism that allows for the division of labor, exchange of goods and services, and development of interdependent relationships that benefit society. The second principle of influence is commitment and consistency. Once we make a choice or take a stand, we encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. We simply don't want to appear indecisive or unreliable, either to ourselves or to others. Cialdini explains that this drive for consistency is powerful enough to make us act in ways that are clearly contrary to our own interests. Commitment is most effective as an influence tool when it's active, public, effortful, and internally motivated. That's why marketers love to get you to take small actions, like filling out a survey or accepting a free sample, because these small commitments make it psychologically more difficult to refuse larger requests later. A classic example is the foot-in-the-door technique, where a small request paves the way for compliance with a larger one. One particularly illustrative study that Cialdini cites involved researchers posing as burglars in a beach setting, placing their beach blanket near another sunbather, the unwitting subject. After some time, the burglar would leave to walk on the beach. Then, a researcher posing as a thief would approach, grab the radio from the burglar's blanket, and attempt to leave. In the control condition, only 4% of sunbathers intervened to stop the theft. However, when the burglar had previously asked the subject to watch their things, creating a verbal commitment, intervention rates jumped to 19%. Even more dramatically, when the subject had agreed to watch the belongings, the intervention rate soared to 95%. The consistency principle explains phenomena like the lowball technique used by car salespeople, where a dealer offers an attractive price to secure a commitment to buy, then finds reasons to increase the price before the sale is finalized. By the time the real price is revealed, many buyers remain committed to the purchase, despite the worst terms. Similarly, toy companies advertise amazing products before Christmas, knowing that parents who promise these gifts to their children will still buy them in January, even at higher prices or lower quality than advertised. To defend against these consistency traps, Cialdini advises us to listen for signals from our bodies, the gut feeling of discomfort that often accompanies situations where we're being manipulated into unwise commitments. When we feel this, we should ask ourselves, knowing what I know now, if I could go back in time, would I make the same commitment? This simple question can break the spell of consistency pressure and allow us to make better decisions. The third weapon of influence is social proof, which states that we determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. Especially in situations where we're uncertain about the proper course of action, we look to others for cues about how to behave. This principle explains everything from laugh tracks on television shows to why restaurants prominently display their most popular dishes. Social proof is most powerful under two conditions: uncertainty and similarity. When we're unsure about what to do, we're more likely to follow others' lead, and we're especially likely to follow the actions of people who seem similar to us. This explains why testimonials are more effective when they come from people with whom the target audience can identify. A disturbing example of social proof gone wrong is the Werther effect, the documented phenomenon that suicide rates increase following publicized suicide stories. Detailed news coverage of a suicide leads to an immediate increase in similar suicides, particularly among individuals who resemble the victim in age and demographics. Even more troubling, murder-suicides often lead to increases in car and plane crashes, suggesting that vulnerable individuals who identify with the original perpetrator may stage their deaths as accidents to spare their families shame. The power of social proof explains why bartenders salt their tip jars with a few bills at the beginning of their shifts, why advertisers use the phrase fastest growing or largest selling, and why cults can induce seemingly rational individuals to engage in bizarre behaviors. When everyone around us is behaving in a certain way, it creates tremendous pressure for us to do the same. To resist manipulation through social proof, we must recognize when social evidence has been deliberately fabricated. When we see testimonials, canned laughter, or suspiciously perfect user reviews, we should remind ourselves that these have been selected or manufactured specifically to influence us. Becoming aware of artificial social proof helps us make more independent decisions. The fourth principle of influence is authority. Cialdini demonstrates that we have a deep-seated tendency to comply with authority figures, even when their requests go against our better judgment. This deference to authority isn't necessarily irrational throughout history. Obedience to legitimate authorities like parents, teachers, and community leaders has typically been rewarding. Authority figures usually possess greater knowledge, wisdom, and power, making obedience a practical shortcut to good decisions in many cases. However, this reflexive respect for authority makes us vulnerable to symbols of authority rather than genuine expertise. Titles doctor, professor, judge, clothing, uniforms, business attire, and trappings, luxury cars, expensive accessories, can trigger automatic compliance, even when the authority is questionable. Cialdini describes how con artists exploit this by posing as authority figures, wearing lab coats in medical scams or security uniforms for home invasion robberies. One of the most striking demonstrations of the power of authority was Stanley Milgram's infamous obedience experiments at Yale University. Participants were instructed by an authority figure, a scientist in a lab coat, to administer what they believed were increasingly painful and dangerous electric shocks to another person, actually an actor, when that person answered questions incorrectly. Despite hearing screams of pain, 65% of participants administered the maximum shock level simply because the authority figure told them to continue. This disturbing result has been replicated across cultures and settings, demonstrating the extraordinary power of authority to overcome our moral qualms. Cialdini notes that authority influence works even with fairly minor symbols. Physiotherapists get better compliance with exercise routines when they display their medical diplomas in their offices. Real estate agents get more business when their receptionist mentions their credentials and expertise before putting callers through. Even automobile salespeople who reference industry awards or specialized product knowledge can increase sales dramatically. To defend against inappropriate authority influence, Cialdini suggests asking two questions. Is this authority truly an expert in this particular matter? How truthful can we expect this expert to be? This second question is crucial because experts may have biases or conflicts of interest that affect their recommendations. When we see a celebrity endorsing a product, we should remember they're being paid for that endorsement, regardless of whether they actually use or value the product. The fifth principle of influence is liking. It's a simple but powerful rule. We prefer to say yes to people we like. Salespeople, charity fundraisers, and others seeking compliance know this well, which is why they try to appear likable and to establish points of similarity with their targets. Cialdini identifies several factors that influence whether we like someone: physical attractiveness, similarity, compliments, contact and cooperation, and association. Physical attractiveness creates a halo effect, whereby we automatically assign favorable traits like talent, kindness, intelligence, and honesty to good-looking people. Research shows that attractive individuals are more likely to receive help, more likely to persuade others, and receive higher salaries for the same work. This happens largely without our conscious awareness. Similarity is another powerful trigger for liking. We like people who are similar to us in opinions, personality traits, background, or lifestyle. This is why salespeople will often search for or even fabricate areas of similarity with prospective customers. Comments like, "I grew up in a neighborhood just like this," or "I see you're a Cardinals fan, me too," aren't just small talk. They're strategic efforts to establish similarity and therefore liking. Compliments, even when obviously transparent, also enhance liking. We have such a strong need for validation that we tend to believe praise and like those who provide it, even when there's ample reason for skepticism. This principle explains why the good cop, bad cop interrogation technique is so effective. The apparent warmth and understanding of the good cop feels like a lifeline to someone who's just faced the hostility of the bad cop. Contact and cooperation also generate liking, especially when people work together toward a common goal. This explains the effectiveness of team-building exercises in creating workplace cohesion and why car salespeople will sometimes take your side against their manager to approve a special deal. They're positioning themselves as your ally in a shared endeavor. Finally, we tend to like things that are associated with other things we already like. This explains why celebrity endorsements work, why companies sponsor sporting events, and why an attractive model draped over a car helps sell the vehicle. We transfer our positive feelings about the things we like to whatever is associated with them. To defend against the liking principle, we need to separate our feelings about a communicator from the merits of what they're offering. When we sense unusual liking for someone who's trying to sell us something, Cialdini suggests a mental step back to ask, would I be responding this way to this request if it were made by someone I don't like as much? If the answer is no, we can recalibrate our response based on the actual value proposition rather than our feelings toward the requester. The sixth and final principle of influence is scarcity. According to this principle, opportunities seem more valuable when they appear less available. This explains why limited time offers, exclusive access, and while supplies last are such common marketing phrases. When something becomes less accessible, we lose freedoms, and we hate to lose freedoms we already have. That's why recently restricted items become more desirable. The Romeo and Juliet effect, where parental opposition to a relationship often increases rather than decreases teenagers' attraction to one another. Scarcity works through two mechanisms. First, we use an item's availability as a shortcut to assess its quality. If something is difficult to get, we assume there's high demand because it's excellent. Second, as items become less available, we lose the freedom to choose them, triggering what psychologists call psychological reactance, a response against restrictions on our autonomy. The most effective scarcity tactics combine newly limited availability with competition. When we're told both that something is in short supply and that others want it too, we're most powerfully motivated to act. This explains why real estate agents might mention that several other buyers are looking at the same property, or why home shopping channels emphasize how quickly items are selling out. Cialdini shares a personal example where he fell victim to the scarcity principle despite knowing better. While shopping for a used car, a dealer told him that another customer was coming back later that day to likely purchase a car Cialdini was considering. Despite recognizing this as a typical sales tactic, Cialdini found himself making an immediate offer, worried about losing the opportunity. When he later called the dealer with second thoughts, they admitted the other buyer's story was fabricated, yet it had still worked on someone who literally wrote the book on such tactics. Scarcity is particularly effective when it's newly introduced. Sale items become more attractive when they're about to revert to full price. Information that appears to be censored or restricted becomes more valuable and persuasive. And scarcity affects our ability to think clearly. When we believe we're about to lose access to something, we focus more on what we might lose than on a rational assessment of the item's actual value to us. To defend against scarcity tactics, Cialdini advises being alert to the rush of excitement that often accompanies perceived scarcity. This emotional response can be a warning sign that we're reacting to the scarcity of an item rather than its intrinsic value. If we feel this surge of desire, we should pause and ask whether we want the item or opportunity for its actual benefits, or simply because it's becoming less available. Now that we've explored all 6 principles of influence, it's important to understand that Cialdini doesn't present this information so we can manipulate others. Rather, his goal is to help us recognize when these principles are being used to manipulate us, and to apply them ethically in our own interactions. Ethical influence means being truthful while using psychology to present our case in the most compelling way. For example, Using reciprocity ethically might mean genuinely helping others before asking for their support. Using commitment and consistency ethically could involve helping people recognize and act on values they already hold. Ethical use of social proof means providing authentic testimonials from satisfied customers rather than creating fake reviews, and so on for each principle. Cialdini emphasizes the difference between influence and manipulation. Influence becomes manipulation when the information used to persuade is fabricated, when people are encouraged to act against their own interests, or when psychological vulnerabilities are exploited without concern for the welfare of those being influenced. Ethical influence, by contrast, involves truthful information presented in a way that connects with how people naturally make decisions. In the years since Influence was first published, Cialdini has continued his research and identified a seventh principle: unity. This principle suggests that we're more likely to say yes to those we consider part of our group or identity. While related to liking and similarity, unity goes deeper. It's about shared identity rather than just shared traits. We're most influenced by those we perceive as us, rather than them. The unity principle explains why family businesses emphasize their family nature, why local businesses highlight their community roots, and why marketing increasingly focuses on shared values and identities rather than just product features. Creating a sense of we-ness is a powerful persuasive tool because it taps into our fundamental desire to belong and to support those who share our identity. Cialdini's research has had a profound impact on fields ranging from marketing and sales to public health and environmental conservation. His principles have been applied to increase charitable donations, improve medication adherence, reduce energy consumption, and enhance workplace safety, among many other applications. This widespread utility demonstrates the universal nature of these psychological principles. They describe fundamental aspects of human decision-making that transcend specific contexts. Understanding these principles also helps us comprehend seemingly irrational behavior. Why would someone continue to invest in a failing business venture? The commitment and consistency principle explains this tendency to throw good money after bad. Why do fashion trends spread so rapidly? Social proof drives our desire to conform to what others are doing. Why do we pay more for name brands when identical generic products are available? The authority principle leads us to trust recognized names and expertise. One of the most valuable insights from Cialdini's work is recognizing the largely automatic nature of much of our compliance. In our complex modern world, we simply don't have the time, energy, or cognitive resources to thoughtfully analyze every decision. Instead, we rely on mental shortcuts, what psychologists call heuristics, to guide our choices. These shortcuts usually serve us well, but they can be exploited by those who understand the triggers that activate them. This automated response pattern explains why persuasion tactics are often most effective when subtle. Once we recognize we're being persuaded, we can engage our critical thinking and evaluate the merits of the request. But skilled compliance professionals know how to fly under our radar, triggering our automatic responses without alerting our defenses. Cialdini refers to these automatic patterns as click, whir responses, like the fixed action patterns observed in animals. Just as a male turkey will attack anything with the physical characteristics of a rival male turkey, humans have certain triggers that produce reflexive responses. The difference is that our triggers are largely socially constructed rather than purely instinctual. They're learned through experience and cultural conditioning. This understanding of automatic response patterns leads to one of Cialdini's most important recommendations: becoming aware of our own triggers. When we feel ourselves being drawn to comply with a request, we should pause and ask whether we're responding to the genuine merits of the offer or to the skillful application of one of the 6 principles. This moment of reflection can help us regain control over our decision-making. Another important consideration is how these principles interact and amplify each other. A persuasion attempt that combines multiple principles is typically more effective than one relying on a single principle. For instance, a charity fundraiser who first gives you a small gift, reciprocity, then asks you to sign a petition about the cause, commitment, while showing how many others have donated, social proof, from an expert in the field, authority, who shares your background, liking, with a limited matching gift opportunity, scarcity, is leveraging all six principles simultaneously. The enduring popularity of Cialdini's book, which has sold over 5 million copies and been translated into more than 30 languages, speaks to the universal nature of these principles and their continued relevance in our rapidly changing world. If anything, understanding these principles has become more important in the digital age, where persuasion attempts come at us constantly through social media, targeted advertising, and sophisticated online marketing. In today's information-saturated environment, companies have unprecedented data about our preferences, behaviors, and psychological triggers, allowing for increasingly personalized influence attempts. Social media platforms are designed to maximize engagement using many of the principles. Cialdini describes social proof through likes and shares, reciprocity through mutual following, commitment through public posts, and scarcity through time-limited content. Political campaigns similarly leverage these principles, using authority figures for endorsements, creating in-group identity, unity, highlighting social proof through polls and crowd sizes, and framing issues in terms of potential losses, scarcity of rights or opportunities. Understanding these tactics helps us evaluate political messages based on substance rather than psychological triggers. Even our personal relationships involve these influence dynamics. When we want to persuade friends or family members, we instinctively appeal to reciprocity. After all I've done for you. Commitment, but you promised. Social proof, everyone else is going. Authority, your doctor would want you to. Liking being extra nice before making a request, or scarcity, this is your last chance to. Recognizing these patterns in our own behavior can help us communicate more honestly and effectively. Rather than manipulating others through psychological triggers, we can present truthful, relevant information in a way that respects others' autonomy while acknowledging the natural psychology of decision-making. The practical applications of Cialdini's principles extend to virtually every area of life. In business, understanding these principles can improve sales, marketing, leadership, and negotiations. In education, teachers can enhance student motivation and engagement. In healthcare, practitioners can increase patient compliance with treatment recommendations. In personal development, these principles can help us influence ourselves to maintain positive habits and achieve goals. Some critics have questioned whether understanding these principles might lead to more manipulation rather than less. Cialdini addresses this concern directly, arguing that bringing these tactics into the light makes them less effective when used unethically. When we recognize a compliance technique being used on us, its power diminishes. Thus, widespread education about these principles ultimately protects consumers and citizens more than it empowers manipulators. Other critics have noted that Cialdini's principles don't account for all influences on decision-making. Factors like emotion, timing, physical environment, and individual differences also play important roles. Cialdini acknowledges these limitations, but maintains that his 6, now 7, principles represent the most consistently powerful and universal triggers of compliance. Research continues to refine our understanding of these principles and how they operate in different contexts and cultures. While the fundamental psychological mechanisms appear to be universal, their specific manifestations vary across cultural settings. For instance, reciprocity exists in all human societies, but what constitutes an appropriate reciprocal response differs between cultures. Similarly, authority influence works universally, but which symbols convey authority varies culturally. In some societies, age confers authority. In others, educational credentials matter more. Effective persuasion requires understanding not just the principles themselves, but how they manifest in specific cultural contexts. The digital transformation of our world has created new applications and expressions of Cialdini's principles. Online reviews represent social proof. Limited time online offers create scarcity. Authority is conveyed through verified accounts and digital credentials. Commitment operates through public posts and online pledges. Reciprocity functions through free content and information exchange. And liking occurs through carefully curated online personas and shared digital experiences. Understanding these digital manifestations helps us navigate online environments more consciously, recognizing when our psychological triggers are being activated and making more deliberate choices about our digital behaviors and purchases. One of the most powerful applications of Cialdini's work is in promoting positive social change. Public health campaigns use social proof to reduce harmful behaviors like smoking or excessive drinking. Environmental initiatives leverage commitment and consistency to promote sustainable practices. Charitable organizations use reciprocity and liking to increase donations. And community organizations build unity to encourage civic engagement. By using these principles ethically to promote beneficial behaviors, practitioners can harness the psychology of influence for the greater good. This represents the highest application of Cialdini's insights, not manipulating others for personal gain, but understanding human psychology to help individuals and communities make better choices. In his later work, Cialdini has focused increasingly on persuasion, the practice of creating receptive moments before attempting to persuade. Just as a farmer must prepare the soil before planting seeds, skilled persuaders create mentally receptive states before presenting their message. This might involve directing attention to specific concepts that prime favorable responses, establishing the communicator's credibility, or creating particular emotional states that enhance receptivity to certain types of messages. The concept of persuasion adds another dimension to influence. Timing and context matter as much as the content of the persuasive message itself. This insight helps explain why the same request might be rejected in one context but accepted in another, and why skilled persuaders seem to have a sixth sense about when to make their appeals. Perhaps the most valuable lesson from Cialdini's work is the importance of ethical influence. In a world where persuasion attempts bombard us constantly, the ability to influence others effectively and ethically represents a crucial skill. By understanding the psychology of persuasion, we can communicate our ideas more effectively, help others make better decisions, and protect ourselves from manipulation. The distinction between ethical influence and manipulation lies not in the techniques themselves, but in three factors. Truth: are the facts being presented accurately? Benefit: does the recommendation genuinely serve the other person's interests? And transparency: would the influence attempt still work if the other person understood the psychology behind it? When these three criteria are met, influence becomes ethical persuasion rather than manipulation. In summary, Robert Cialdini's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, offers profound insights into why people say yes. Through extensive research and real-world observation, Cialdini identified 6 universal principles that drive human compliance: reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity. Understanding these principles helps us recognize influence attempts in our daily lives, defend against unwanted manipulation, and ethically apply these same principles in our own communications. In our complex modern world, where influence attempts come at us from every direction, Cialdini's work provides a valuable framework for more conscious decision-making. By recognizing the psychological triggers that often operate below our awareness, we can make choices based on genuine merit and value rather than automatic reactions to skillful persuasion techniques. This awareness empowers us as consumers, citizens, and communicators, helping us navigate social influence with greater intentionality and wisdom. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into influence, the psychology of persuasion. If you found this summary valuable, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more insightful book summaries, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which of Cialdini's 6 principles of influence do you find most fascinating or have you noticed being used on you recently? Remember, you can get your own copy of this eye-opening book through the link in the video description. By understanding the psychology of persuasion, you'll be better equipped to make conscious choices in a world designed to influence you.